covers a larger area, and my shadow is so much softer. It's completely softer, and it's no longer hard edge. So the shadow and the highlight are absolutely tied together. Now here's what's interesting. Leonardo da Vinci, in some of the papers that were found, he had 16 volumes of books that he wrote. 16 volumes, 15 of which have been lost. Family members stole them, other people stole them, they sold them out. This is from the 1500s, so who knows where they all, but there was one that remained and one that was found. And it's been compiled into a little booklet called A Treatise on Painting, Treatise, A Treatise on Painting. And he's got one segment in there called Light and Shadow. And what he said was, in order to produce depth in a painting, you need 3 brightness levels. Okay? You need the true brightness of your subject, and then you need 2 brightnesses that are not true. One that's brighter than the true brightness, and one that's darker than the true brightness. What he told us in that statement is that we've got to have true brightness, which is right there. We've got to have a brightness that's not true, which is right there. And we've got to have a brightness that's not true, which is right there, in order to produce depth, shape, form, texture, dimension. Okay? So what he's saying is you've got to have all 3 of these things, and then you have depth. Great. How many of those are you in charge of? You're in charge of 2 of them. I'm not in charge of what you look like, Britt. You are. I'm not in charge of your skin tone. You are. I am in charge of what I do with this and that, and that. I can do anything I want with those highlights and shadows. I can make the shadow as sharp as I want. I can make it as soft. I can bring in a reflector and make it almost non-existent. I can make that highlight enormous, or I can make that highlight small and sharp and cutting. I can do anything I want with the shadow and the highlight, but one thing I cannot muck around with is that. You better look like you look, or I fail. You're in charge of that part. I have to properly expose that. But in the world of light quality, that's up to you. You get to look how you look, you know. It's funny how, to me, and I want to roll this right into the meter here in just a sec, but it's funny to me how many people second guess their exposures with meters. My brother-in-law was my best friend and gave me my first job in photography. And I went to Lagos, Nigeria in 1980. I was brand new. I was a young photographer, and I went to photograph 65 heads of state. Now, it's a long story that you don't want to hear how I got this job. But one of the things that happened was the last thing my brother-in-law told me as I got on the plane is, now remember, their skin's really, 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 really dark. Open up a little extra on your exposure. And I was like, okay, and off I went. And what I was doing was I was exposing for their tonality as opposed to exposing for the amount of light I had. The problem was, on the opening night of this exhibit that I was at the Federal Palace, I've got all these really, really, really dark faces and one person dressed in white who was from the UK and had really lily white skin. And I opened up because everybody's skin is so dark, and I nuked this poor girl. Right? So what I learned quickly was, okay, note to self. You don't expose based on someone's tonality. You expose based on the quantity of light that is present. And if you do that, you can't get fooled. Right? So it's like when you do a group shot. Well, some people are wearing a black suit and some people are wearing a white shirt. You can't change your exposure based on what they are wearing. You have to change your exposure based on how much light you have. That's all that matters with the exposure. How much light is there? And that was the biggest lesson for me. So as long as I can properly place that exposure on that file, right there, at that place of true tonality, that true brightness of your skin tone, or the car, or the widget, whatever I'm photographing, as long as I can place that there, then those 2 I can do anything I want with. Those are subjective. The highlights and shadows, totally subjective. That is my one piece of objectivity in the photograph. Does that make sense? Did that confuse anybody out there, Russ? Do we have anybody going?
That's what I'm checking, just making sure. Let us know if you're confused or if that made sense to you.
Yeah, everybody just nod. Okay, so having said all that, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And this kind of ties to these guys, the cups. I know that with the white cup, I've got to deal heavily with that side of the scale. And I know with the black cup, I'm dealing heavily with that side of the scale. If I'm photographing a white car, all I care about are the shadows. And if I'm photographing a black car, all I care about are the highlights. Make sense? Mm-hmm. When I photograph people, I've got both sides to deal with. I've got highlights and shadows. I'm dealing with what Da Vinci called three-dimensional contrast. Three-dimensional contrast. All three have to be there. Okay? All right, so now we got that part done. Now let's talk about meters a little bit. Let me grab a couple of light meters here. Excuse me. So I started using the Sekonic meters a few years ago, and I've been having remarkable luck with, in particular, the L758DR, which has become this has been my workhorse, and I mentioned this before. This has been my workhorse now almost 10 years. And it's just a brilliant meter. And what they've done is, in a very short period of time, they've kind of taken on the world as the de facto standard in the industry. And one thing that's good about using the de facto industry standard of any industry in the world is that everybody knows it. And if you have trouble, people can help you with it. And there's service centers, and there are rental houses, and you can ask any photographer, oh, I've got a Sekonic 358 or 758, and I need help with such and such. Somebody in the room will help you, because they know it. If you get another brand, they might not. But there are other brands out there. There are other brands available. What I found these to be is absolutely accurate, provided that they're calibrated properly. As long as they are calibrated properly. And now, what I'm about to tell you now may make the people at Sekonic cringe, and they might say, oh, don't ever say that again, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I've done this for years. They did a real clever thing about calibration with the Sekonic meter. And what they did is they gave us the ability to adjust the calibration personally. So I know that the brightness level of the sun on a bright sunny day is consistent. It's the same brightness anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter if I'm at sea level or on top of a mountain. It's the same brightness. I'm still 93 million miles away from the stinking sun. So I know that as long as the sun is 20 degrees above the horizon, it peaks at its brightness. And it stays at that same relative brightness all day long until it gets to 20 degrees on the other horizon. Okay? As long as there's no clouds in the sky, the brightness doesn't change. 1/10 of a stop. I've measured it many, many times to try to prove this theory wrong, but it's true. Once it hits 20 degrees, that thing is consistent. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You remember the Sunny 16 rule? Anybody remember that rule? I'll refresh you. The Sunny 16 rule states that on a front-lit subject, when the sun is 20 degrees above the horizon, you use the ISO that you're shooting at as your shutter speed and shoot at f/16. So if you're dialing in 400 ISO, then set your shutter speed at 1/400th of a second and shoot at f/16 on a front-lit subject, and your exposure will be perfect. Perfect. Not close, perfect. That's the way this theory works. And it's stupid accurate. It's really accurate. So here's what I started doing years ago when I got my first Sekonic. I learned that if you push in ISO, I'll try to hold this steady in case you guys want to get a shot of this. If you push in ISO 1 and ISO 2 at the same time, what you get in the little window is a little 3-letter code that says ADJ for adjustment. Most people that have a Sekonic meter don't even know it's here. But just push in both ISOs at the same time. They're spring-loaded. Push them both in, bam, and it says ADJ. Then you have this little thumb wheel that you can adjust that calibration higher or lower, whatever it needs. Okay? So here's how you're going to do it. You're going to go outside on a bright sunny day. You're going to figure out, I would do this. I would dial in ISO 125, shutter speed 125, and go outside and find the sun and put that dome directly at the sun with no shadows on the dome and take a reading. And it should read 16.0. Yeah. Good one, John. For those of you from Seattle, I'm sorry. Move to Phoenix. ISO 125, shutter speed 125, and take a reading. It should read 16. Most of you will not read 16 with your Sekonic meters. Most of you will be off 1 or 2 or 3 tenths of a stop. If you're off more than that, you're probably missing some exposures. But mostly my meter, let me just look at mine real quick. Yeah, I'm off by 3 or 4 tenths myself. So what you do is, if it reads, let's say it reads 11.8, well, then I just push in and hold in both ISOs, and I push in the adjustment, and I run that knob up and down until I go, like if it's 11.8, it needs to be plus 2 tenths. So I'll go plus 1 click, plus 2 clicks, and it'll show in the window. And now, if I read it again, now it reads 16.0. Make sense? That calibrates this meter to my way of thinking. I'm now calibrated. Now, having said all of that, there is another option, which is to shoot the X-Rite color checker passport, which is brilliant, and it will bring you into target and neutralize that all of your cameras and get your camera and your meter and your laptop and everybody all talking, and it zeroes everything in, and it gives you a preset DNG, which is a master file basically of your camera, and that's a pretty clever way to go too. I've just done this so long, this is automatic for me to do this. You know, and I don't, well, you saw yesterday, I don't miss my exposure too much. So I just do what the meter tells me. I'm kind of like that. Okay, does that compute everyone okay? Yeah.
I would love for you to repeat that. I bought one of those and it owns me.
Yeah.
I've read the instructions so many times and I could not figure out how to do the ISO. I would have been dead if my life depended on it. So just in 2 seconds, you taught me how to do something. But if you can repeat that last thing you just said, because it kind of went over in my head.
Okay, so you're going to take a reading with ISO 125 and shutter speed 125, and you're going to take a reading of the sun. You're going to set, by the way, and I should clarify, make sure that the mode setting is on ambient light, not flash. You need to read the ambience of the sun. So then you're going to go outside and you're going to aim it right at the sun and just take a reading. Whoops, I just fired off. I'm set to channel 3 right now. Yeah, whoops. Okay, so you're going to go outside and you're going to take a reading of the sun, and it needs to read 16.0. If it doesn't read 16.0, then if it's, let's say it reads 16.3, or let's say 16.4. So that means when you push in ISO 1 and ISO 2, and that little adjustment window pops up, then you're going to have to roll down that thumb wheel -1, 2, 3, 4, until you get to calibration. I just roll it down and I just change basically I'm changing the sensitivity of the meter, either more sensitive or less sensitive by 1/10 at a time. Make sense? Most people don't even know it's there. Totally. Right. Same with the percentage meter outside. Most people don't even know it's there. We're not going to be going outside, but when you use flash outside and you take a flash reading with the Sekonic, it will pop in the upper left corner a little small percentage number. And that percentage number tells you how much percentage of that exposure is flash and how much percentage is ambience. And then it's just a simple, for me, there's only 3 options. For me, it's real simple. If it's 30%, that's a fill light flash. If it's 50-50, they're one-on-one. And if it's 70, that's a main light flash. That's the way I think about it. So I just make that work for me. I try to simplify things. You guys, I'm not a very smart guy, so I try to simplify things. You know, I've got 4 controls of light: additive, subtractive, transmission, reflective. We talked about that already. I've got 4 tools of light. I've got speed light, studio lights, sun, and ambience. As long as I understand, and then I've got, with this, I know that everything that I do, I've got minimized down to the lowest number, so I don't have to think too much. I've only got 3 exposures I want to use with flash outdoors. It's either as a fill, or it's even, or I want it as a main light. Period. One of those 3. So give me 30% or 50% or 70%, and that's it. I've got to make it simple in my little brain. So I know that some of this stuff sounds really technical, and it sounds like I'm some kind of a whiz kid science dude. Well, I'm not. I'm a guy that just needs to simplify my life. And if I simplify it down to those common denominators, I don't make mistakes. It's when I try to get outside of that where I screw up too bad, you know.
Okay, so we need to know, you've got a bunch of questions. So first of all, for people who may be really new to light meters, Harold C. wants to know, when you calibrate the meter outside using the sun, does that calibration then hold for studio use as well?
Yes, it does. I've basically set the meter I've changed or altered the meter's sensitivity across the board, basically. Yeah.
Right, cool. And Smitty MD would like to know, how do we then calibrate our cameras to our light meter? My camera seems to be a stop lower than my meter tells me.
I don't have time to explain that one.
Okay.
That's a great question, and Smitty MD, probably a doctor, Dr. Smitty. Go online and look at the X-Rite videos. They've got some tutorials on YouTube on how to do that through their Checker Passport system, and it's pretty clever. And it calibrates and sort of zeroes out the noise in your camera. Think about this, if you're a wedding guy and you've got 3 cameras, your cameras aren't exactly calibrated together, but through that system and that question that he's asking, you can calibrate those 3 cameras together. And you can zero everything back to what is true and accurate. And that's all we're after. We just want true and accurate. And I don't care if my calibration says I have to calibrate 2/3 of a stop or a full stop. I don't even care, as long as it's consistent every time. I can hit any target as long as it stops moving. You know? As long as it's the same and as long as it's consistent, that's all I care about.
Love it. Cool. Quick one from JK Photography, and a number of people yesterday were asking about this. Do you have an opinion on iOS light meter apps? Or there's a new tool called the Luxy, which is basically a little light meter that attaches to your iPhone and then works on that. Do you have any experience with or opinions about those?
Yes.
Uh-oh.
I can't go there. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're there yet. I'll tell you what, some close friends of mine and I were all talking one night, and one of the guys says, you know, if we're smart, we would make a Bluetooth app so that if I pull out my iPhone, if I'm going to take a picture of Catherine right here in the front row, I can say, John, turn on your camera or your phone and move your phone right there, and I can do a flash here and his flash will fire. That's not there yet, but it should be, and I just told somebody how to do it.
But
But I don't have time to mess with it, so.
I don't think there's an iPhone light meter out there that does flash.
Yeah, they read ambience, but they don't read
ambient.
flash. And that's part of the problem here. It's why your camera meter is great in your camera for location work, but your your meter inside your camera doesn't read flash, unless you're using the high-end Hasselblad digital, the D40 maybe I think it is, that 645 format Hasselblad digital is the only camera in the world that has a built-in flash meter. So the answer is, boy, it's tough to do this with accuracy with a $9 app. I can't imagine it being that accurate. I have one on my phone, and I keep texting, I keep looking at it, but I don't think for my professional work I could rely on that as my tool. And then you step out of the chute and try to call your client, your phone's dead. So, you know, you got that going for you.
Hey,
That is perfectly fair. Thank you.
Tony, Delta Dave would like to know, best practices. How often should you calibrate your light meter?
I check it all the time. I'll probably, well, not all the time, but I'll check it a couple of times a month. And as long as my exposures are good and true and accurate, it doesn't really drift off of calibration. Many of you will find that your calibration might be right on, but some of you might be off 1/3 of a stop or 2/10 or 4/10. And don't pass out if you are. Just fix it. Just change the calibration and keep working. As long as you are getting good, true exposures, that's what matters. And I will visit, this is a good time to visit another option here. Please be careful about using your LCD preview on the back of your camera as your light meter. If you want to use your camera for your light meter, then use the histogram. You've got to live and breathe and die inside that histogram. If you're missing that, in fact, John, I need that board again. I'm sorry. Can I get the board again?
Oh, sure.
If you are going to use the back of your camera to check your exposures, don't even look at the picture. What the picture does is it'll tell you if you're sharp or not, and it's great to tell you that all your lights are firing, but don't use it to live and die on your exposures. Use the histogram. And the way that I've come to learn to use my histograms is simply, I think about it like this. And you guys, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here on this aspect, but I'll make this real fast and brief. I know that a true and normal exposure with a full range file will have a gap on the left and a gap on the right. If I miss a gap here and if I miss a gap here, I don't have quite the full range image and I'm losing information somewhere in my file. So up on the overexposure side, this is a normal, say a 0 exposure. If I open up and go +1 here, my exposure is going to look, my histogram is going to look like this. And what that tells me is there's some more information that's outside of my histogram. Will Crockett describes that as a pipe. You know, all the detail has to fit in the pipe, and if it doesn't fit in the pipe, it can't print. That's a pretty easy, simple way to state it. And if I go minus, so that would be a +1 there, and if I go a -1 here, what do you think it's going to look like? It's going to look like this. And that gap's going to even be wider on that side, and I know this tells me I've got some areas that are going to block up. Don't worry about the peaks. Don't worry about the height of the peaks. That's none of your business. That's color information. What I care about is here to here. I carry left on right. I care about that gap left and gap right. If I miss that, I'm in trouble. And with that meter, everything that I shoot, I got a gap left and a gap right. When I walked up to that meter, or that monitor yesterday on her face, and I looked close and I could see detail in the shadow and detail in the highlight, I was perfectly dead on. I'm not a genius. I just use the meter, and I don't have to adjust it in post. And that's what's critical to me. I need that to happen every time I pull the trigger. If I'm shooting like that, I'm in trouble because I got to fix something later. It can be fixed later. I'm not saying it can't. But it has to be stated that I'm not going to fix it later. What's the point of that? Sorry. Soapbox. I need a flashing sign. Soapbox time.
Another consideration with that, too, is with using the histogram, is that it's a histogram of the processed JPEG that the camera gave you.
Right.
So if your camera's set to neutral, you're going to get one histogram. If your camera's set to brilliant or saturated colors, you're going to get a different histogram. Right. So even the back of the camera histogram is not
and that preview that you're seeing is a JPEG. It's a JPEG preview. It's not a raw preview. You know, so take it with a grain of salt what you're looking at. It can be close, and that's great, but you got to that histogram is. That's the stuff. That's the shizzle right there.